is Charlene Margot, and I am the co-founder of the Parent Venture, a nonprofit organization. The Parent Education Series, which you are attending tonight, is one of our initiatives. We are, again, very glad to welcome you here tonight and absolutely honored and delighted to have with us Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. You'll be hearing a little bit more about our keynote presenters in just a minute. But I first wanted to say, if you need Spanish interpretation, we have with us tonight Trini Lara. In the chat, you will see instructions in Spanish for how to log on to the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So you'll hit the interpretation button and then Spanish if you would like to hear live Spanish interpretation. Again, tonight's topic, with over 700 registered, we know is very timely and very important, especially as kids are heading back to school, some of them for the first time in almost 2 years. We would not be here without the sponsorship of the Sequoia High School Education Foundation, the Sequoia Union High School District, Sequoia Healthcare District, and the Parent Venture. In addition, tonight, we are partnering with Kepler's Books, an independent bookseller based in Menlo Park, who gave us the honor of providing books for this event, which will be distributed to wellness coordinators and other administrators and health-based folks in our community. Tonight's format, we will have about 45 minutes of content from Bill and Ned, and then we really want to engage you, our viewers. At the bottom of the screen, again, most of you who are used to Zoom by now, you will see both a chat button and a Q&A button. My partner, Bev Hartman, in the chat will be putting relevant links, so do check that out. Feel free to make comments to us or to one another in the chat, but please put your questions in the Q&A box, the Q&A button. I will be joining the gentlemen again in about 45 minutes to answer those questions with them. So we'll have a conversation to engage you, the audience, at the end of this program. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in that Q&A button. We will be checking, okay? First of all, also, I want to say that this event is being recorded tonight and will be available on the Video Library, which is a YouTube channel of the Parent Education Series, a free resource that we offer. It has been very popular, especially since COVID, with over 23,000 views. That is a free resource, again, open to you, parents, educators, mental health professionals, and community members. Our next event is next week, Madeline Pizy on mindful parenting, reducing COVID stress and anxiety. That is on Thursday, September 9th at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. All right, let me tell you a little bit about tonight's keynote presenters. Ned Johnson is an author, speaker, and founder of Prepmatters, an educational company providing academic tutoring, educational planning, and standardized test preparation. A professional tutor geek since 1993, Ned has spent more than 40,000 hours helping students conquer standardized tests, learn to manage their anxiety, and find the motivation to reach their full potential. He is the co-author of Conquering the SAT and host of the Prep Talks podcast, a sought-after speaker and teen coach on study skills, sleep deprivation, parent-teen dynamics, and anxiety. His work is featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, BBC, and many other media outlets. Thank you, Ned. Bill Stixrud, PhD, is a clinical neuropsychologist and founder of the Stixrud Group, as well as a faculty member at Children's National Medical Center and assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington School of Medicine. He's on the board of the David Lynch Foundation. Dr. Stixrud's work has been featured in media outlets such as NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and Scientific American. He is a longtime practitioner of transcendental meditation, and he proudly plays in the rock band Close Enough. Bill and Ned are the co-authors of their best-selling book, The Self-Driven Child, and their new book, which we will be discussing this evening, What Do You Say? Talking with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. I wish we were in a theater together, but please join me in a really warm welcome, a warm virtual welcome for Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Take it away, Bill and Ned.
Thank you so much, Charlene. We love Charlene and Bev, and we love what they're doing, and we feel honored to be part of this parent education series. Um, so, about a year after our first book, The Self-Driven Child, was published, our agent said, it's time for to think about a second book. And what he said was that give parents more language. It makes it easier to communicate with their kids. And he said, make it easier to do what you suggest in The Self-Driven Child. And it made sense. I mean, we still have parents often say, God, I've told him a million times, or I keep trying to get him to see, or just every time we talk about this, we fight about the same thing over and over again. And, I lecture him, I nag at him, I scold him. I just don't know what else to do. So we thought, that we've been talking with kids for 65 years between the two of us, one-on-one. And in our first book, we had a fair number of scripts and lines like, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework, something that people have been able to use. So we thought, we can do this. Let's write a book that focuses on how we talk to kids to develop these develop self-driven kids who have that internal motivation, can stay in their right mind, have high stress tolerance, and in ways that promote kind of harmony and happiness at home. And I will say, I think that Ned and I are pretty good at communicating kids. There's some kids are not easy to communicate with. There's some years ago, I was testing a kid, and I as I do, I ended some kind of cognitive test, and then I started my interview. And I always start my interview by saying, when you think about the kids are you as happy as most kids, happier, less happy? And this one kid said, can we play the library game? And I said, oh, okay, what's that? I said, shh. So, in any case, but generally, the principles that we talk about in this book, that they're time tested, they work well. And the self-driven child, our major focus was on developing this healthy sense of control because it's so good for everything. It's so good for motivation, for mental health, for physical health, for relationships. Having a healthy sense of control over your own life is really a powerful thing. When we started thinking about communicating with kids and talking with kids, we thought, ultimately the purpose of communication is connection. We said, let's take a step back and let's write the first chapter on using language to connect with kids. And in writing the book, early in the stages of writing the book, we interviewed we had these focus groups, and we interviewed dozens of kids, mainly teenagers and kind of older children and younger teenagers. We asked them, who do you feel closest to? And so, sometimes it's mom or dad, but a lot of times it was an older cousin or an uncle or a teacher or a grandparent. And we'd say, what is it about this person that makes you feel close? And invariably, the kid would say, he listens to me and without judgment, doesn't judge me, and he doesn't tell me what to do. And I was just talking with a girl today, a 14-year-old who I just finished testing, who's having a boatload of emotional problems. And I said, what's helpful to you? So we'll talk if my therapist is helpful. And honest to God, she said, because she listens to me without judgment and she doesn't tell me what to do. It's a really powerful thing. And we know, this made sense because we know that the tools for creating closeness are empathy and validation, empathizing with kids' feelings and validating their feelings. And Ned, I'd love you to take over, buddy, and talk a little bit about this empathy and validation.
Yeah, and part of the sort of flip side of that coin is that when our kids are upset or they're having a hard time, things aren't going well, we have this tendency to want to use words, of course, to fix them. But so often the words that we use are logical words. We try to help kids see things in a different way. We try to talk them out of the hard feelings. And the challenge is that logic doesn't calm hard emotions. If when we're upset, what we really want is to talk with someone who we feel like understands us, who gets where we're coming from. And to add to that, we know that strong feelings are also sharing strong feelings is what creates closeness. When you think about your best friends in the world, the person you feel closest to, these are people where you've gone back and forth of sharing when things are hard, when you're down in the dumps, when you had a breakup, when there was some real challenge. And we feel safe sharing those hard feelings with people, but we also become close with them sharing those hard feelings. And so we start the first chapter in the book of What Do You Say leads with empathy and validation, because ultimately, this is a book about how do we as parents, as teachers, as caregivers, how are we effective in communicating with anyone, but in this case with children? And we start with empathy and validation, because from a neurological perspective, this is what calms the stress response and makes people receptive to all the ways that we want to help. So for example, any of us might have experience of a kid coming home from school, and is just all spun up, and I did terribly on the test and it was so unfair. And, and they put the problems on the test and they didn't even tell us we're going to be on there. Right. And now as a parent, you might be thinking, I saw a little differently. Like, you were playing video games kind of late and you could have started studying 3 days ago, like I suggested you, and blah, blah. And at least if you're in my household, if you make those suggestions right out of the gate, they get thrown right back in your face. And that's not a happy place, because then you're trying to offer suggestions. They reflexively bat them away. Then they're upset with you. You're upset, and you're upset with them being upset. And the kind of nothing is being shared in a useful way. And so one of the tools for expressing empathy and validation, one of the guideposts, is that we want to first seek to understand what's going on. And we borrowed liberally from a guy named Moran McGinn, who our good friend Charlene Margot introduced us to. And so he's a really communications expert, a terrific guy. His classes are wonderful. And he introduced us to the concept of wigging. And wigging is reflective listening, which is really the foundational tool, probably the oldest tool in all of psychology. Wigging stands for what I got is. And so when that kid comes home and is all spun up about a test or whatever, you can simply say something like, so let me make sure I have that right. Let me repeat back and make sure I got that right. So you took a test, you really felt like you studied, you're well prepared, and it was just it was a train wreck, and you're super upset because you feel like the teacher put things on there that they didn't tell we're going to be on the test. Do I have that about right? Yeah, it's so unfair. Well, now you've started a conversation where you're aligning energy with them. And eventually, and we'll talk about this in a moment, we can eventually pivot towards giving them helpful information and advice. But first, we start with empathy and validation. And I'll share with this because the tendency we have is either to talk kids out of hard feelings or to try to solve the problem for them. When we were last out in your corner of the world, giving a talk at, I think, Pali High School, if I remember correctly, the next day, we got an email from a mom who said, I heard your talk. I really enjoyed it. I came home last night and my 7th grader came to me in tears. And he was out of his mind. He said, I'm the weakest kid in all of 7th grade. And it was just a mess. And she said, normally I would have said, oh, sweetheart, that can't possibly be true. Or I would have said, you're good at so many other things, or you'll get stronger, or we'll talk to the coach. And I would have tried to solve it. But instead, I listened with empathy and I said, gosh, it sure seems like you're really upset, and I understand that I'd be upset too if I felt like I was really weak when the other kids were strong, and that's what I wanted to be too. And part of it, I took your advice and tried it. And part of it, I also really didn't know what to say. And it had the effect of calming him down because he felt listened to. And here's the great part. The next morning, he came down to breakfast with a plan, a written plan for gaining strength. And he said, Mom, can I run this by you? I'd love your help. And this is the position that we all want to be in, is helping our kids with their buy-in, with us being on the same team. And the way that we get ourselves on the same side as they are is starting with empathy and validation.
It's interesting, Ned. I was doing a podcast today, being interviewed, and a woman said, well, the stuff you're recommending, it's not easy. It takes practice. I said, it does. It really becomes a practice to use some tools that you have to practice to integrate them, but it can work very quickly. And I told her this story because it just took this one simple shift. And this girl I was telling you about, has really significant emotional problems. Her parents are being coached on empathy and validation. And a couple of weeks ago, she brought up some kind of problem, and they responded in this kind of new way. And she sent them an email the next morning and said, I know you're really trying to help me, and the way you responded was so helpful to me. So it's pretty cool. So in our new book, we pick up some of the themes from the self-driven child from the perspective of communication. And the first one is this idea of we think that as kids get older, it makes sense for parents to think of ourselves more as consultants to our kids than as our kids' manager or the boss or the homework police. And there's really three implications of this idea. And the first one is that we want to offer help, we want to offer our advice, offer our wisdom, but not try to force it down kids' throat. Yeah, Ned has this great cartoon. The dad has his two kids by the nape of the neck and is saying, "Listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm only going to tell you this 1,000,000 times." And we want to avoid that. So we want to offer our help. We want to offer our perspective, our wisdom, but not try to force it, because if we try to force it, we just get resistance. And the second implication is we want kids to, as much as possible, to make their own decisions. And I felt my whole career as a neuropsychologist, the best message you can give a teenager, besides "I love you" more than anything, is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before I send you off to college. And the third implication is that we want kids, as much as possible, and with our support, to solve their own problems. Because it's the process. If something stressful happens, if you can't immediately get somebody else to solve it for you, you got to solve it yourself. You activate your prefrontal cortex, which dampens down your stress response. And so you go into coping mode. And we want kids to have a lot of experience with something stressful happens, going into coping mode, because it trains the brain basically to be resilient, trains the brain instead of avoiding or instead of freaking out, to go into coping mode when something stressful happens. And our goal is that for kids to be able to run their own life before we send them off to college or whatever we send them off to do. And I was in Houston lecturing about the self-driven child before the pandemic. And I happened to mention one of the most elite schools in DC. I don't remember why I mentioned it, but this woman came up to me afterwards and said, "I'm a therapist here at the Menninger Clinic in Houston. And we know this school in DC really well, because so many of the kids get into the most elite colleges, but they can't handle it emotionally. So they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment." And she said, to the one, they just don't have this experience running their own life. And so we think what we talk about is, for example, is the language of getting buy-in. Ned and I we just don't want to be the 10th person to tell kids you should do this or do. We want to get buy-in. So we say things like, "Can I make a suggestion? I've got an idea about that. Can I run it by you?" Or, "I wonder what would happen if you did it this way." Or one that I use a lot is, "For whatever it's worth." I mean, I'll just say this, whatever it's worth. And so it's tentative, and it's not, you need to pay attention to this. It's offering. And we're much less likely to get resistance if we do that. And one of the other things we talk about in terms of the language of a parent consultant is the idea of not trying to force. And I was really struck. Ross Green, who specializes in working with very difficult, resistant, oppositional kids, realized that these kids, the more inflexible and resistant kids are, the less they respond to attempts to force them. So he started saying, I want you to know that I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to try to make you do things. And when my kids were little, I knew that I couldn't make them do something. And I'd use this kind of like a judo move. I'd say, I understand, I couldn't make you do that. And I just say, all you'd have to do is flop on the floor or close your eyes. I couldn't make you do this. So we got to kind of work together on this. So it's the language of you take force off the table. And that idea, "I love you too much to fight with you about your homework," is one of the ideas that I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to try to force, because I couldn't make you. And when you take the force off the table, in some ways, it's so empowering. A couple of years ago, a woman called my office and asked my wife, who keeps my calendar, can Bill basically talk my kid into taking Ritalin? He's been diagnosed with ADHD in 2nd grade. He's in 8th grade now at a Catholic school. He's applying out to Catholic high schools. He's tanking, and he needs to take his Ritalin. And his pediatrician had to come to Jesus meeting with him last year, and he still refused. And my wife said, "Bill doesn't believe in talking kids into things, but he'll talk to him about it." So I meet with this boy and I say, "The first thing I want you to know is I don't want anybody to try to make you take medicine. You're smart to figure this out yourself. And in fact, if somebody tried to force you, just put it in your cheek and you pretend, and you pretend to swallow, and then you go spit it out. I promise you, and I'll talk to your parents, I don't want anybody to try to make you take this medicine. However, I think it makes sense to make an informed decision, because a lot of kids, it's like turning on a light switch, and it'd kind of be nice to know whether that you're one of those kids. And so with force off the table, he said, let me try it and see what it does. And 2 months later, his mother called me and said, he's got straight A's from straight C's 2 months previously when he started taking the medicine. Now, medicine doesn't usually turn things around that dramatically, but it's so powerful. And this happens all the time with me, where I just start with no force. And then I'm much more able to get cooperation. I'm much more able to get kids to try things. And in my experience with this, it worked as a parent as well as a psychologist.
We talk about that point to some degree in our first book, The Self-Driven Child, and make the point that this no force, because it quiets the amygdala, the threat detecting part of our brain, or at least doesn't fire it up, it makes it much more likely that the person with whom we're trying to convey some information, that rational decision-making, put things in perspective part of the brain is engaged, as opposed to the runaway, freeze, fight, or flight part of the brain. And so much of the language, so much of what we talk about in what he's saying is not just the what, but the how, as Bill is suggesting here. And we talk a lot about changing the energy. And one of the things we talk about in changing the energy, kind of this energy of no force, is for all of us as parents to do the best we can to move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, a concept that we borrowed from a wonderful consultant named Edwin Friedman and talked about in The Self-Driven Child. And he made the point simply that when the person or people who are in charge aren't overly emotional and they aren't overly reactive, systems just work better, because I get super spun up and intense and doing all this kind of thing. Then the people around me are going to have the same reaction. Then no one's kind of thinking that clearly. So obviously we would have an interest in families, in school systems, and frankly in our whole country, if we could do that we were a little bit less reactive to everything. Sadly, that's not exactly what we found when we've been all over the country, that we were out in your corner of the world and finding, second graders in full on school refusal, the fifth grade boys in Texas who were overwhelmed by the pressure of school. And, we thought DC was the only place where kids were feeling this intense, and it's really everywhere. And this isn't to point a finger at Texas or Washington, DC or Palo Alto, area. It's simply that if this is going on everywhere that we go, there must be a consistent drumbeat of messages being delivered to kids, not by me as a parent or Bill as a parent or a school system, but constant messages of be very afraid. Not anxious, but be very afraid. So we've been trying to put our fingers on kind of where are these messages coming from. And so a huge part of this is through our language, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but also through the constant checking, right? How are your grades? What's the GP up to the day, up to the hour? There's a wonderful or somewhat dispiriting article in the Wall Street Journal this week about kids going off to college and parents using Life 360 to do everything from tracking where they are to seeing if their cell phone has run out of charge and texting, so your cell phone's running out of charge, or to how fast you're moving in a car. And while we understand that inclination that parents have to try to make sure that their kids are safe, we really question, are they checking that they're safe, or are they conveying messages that I'm so afraid that I need to be sure that you're okay at every moment of the day? And so we really want to move in the direction of doing less of that. And part of the flip side to this is that calm is contagious. All emotions are contagious, and so is calm. And in fact, it's one of the mantras of the Navy SEALs, that they know that if the leader who's in charge, that it passes from one to the next, and we can collectively make ourselves all more calm. And part of this is also in the language. We look at the research of including John and Julie Gottman, who are these relationship gurus, and talk about for a relationship to have kind of a positive bent to it, a more optimistic, a more rosy, and more supportive as opposed to negative. We need to pay attention to the ratio rather, of positive and negative words, because negative words are more powerful than positive words. If you have a person in a functional MRI and say the word no, it's this cascading effect of stress, the stress response through the whole brain in ways that are way more powerful. So no and fear and hate and threat, as opposed to love and peace. And so within their research, they found that in order to keep things on the kind of glass half full rather than glass half empty, we need to have a ratio that's at least 5 to 1, 5 positive things for 1 negative thing. Otherwise, we end up conveying kind of negative emotions, including fear, which we really don't want to do with folks. And then the third part we talk in this chapter is what helps us use language that is more positive, that is more non-anxious. And so we talk about practices for lowering our own stress. The way that I see this is that if the inflows of stress into my life or my body, my household are greater than the healthy outflows of stress, we're going to have a problem. And so this is part of the reason why, Bill's 47 years now. Bill is a practitioner of transcendental meditation. For me, it's been about 10 years. I'll make a real quick point. I won't dwell on it, but about 8 weeks ago, our son, Matthew, was diagnosed with a brain tumor right as I was recording the audio for our audiobooks. You should take a listen and see if you can hear the change. And when my wife and I came out, I was on the phone and his language was falling apart. Literally, I thought he was having a stroke. And we sort of did this, and my wife called here, and we sort of, got him to the right folks he needed to be. And one of the most interesting things out of this whole thing, apart from my loss of hair, because we all shaved our heads together, is that people have repeatedly said to me and to my wife, "How are you so calm about this?" And my wife, Vanessa, said to me, she said, "Honestly, I think it's practicing the meditation, because DC is a pretty intense place. But having these tools that allow us to pull stress out of our system allows us as parents to be so much more effective, because in addition to the calm is contagious, the Reverend Billy Graham made the point, the courage is contagious. And through this whole process that we're going through, and we're got everything crossed for a great outcome for our son, we're doing everything we can to convey calm and courage in the face of adversity. And goodness knows most kids have enough going on right now. And it sure seems like if we can move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence ourselves to help our kids feel calm and courageous as well, that's probably a pretty good thing.
It sounds good to me. And I'll just tell you, I know this kid with autism who he and his mother learned transcendental meditation. And the mother is well connected and had a reporter do a story on it. And the story asked that this 17-year-old boy with autism, what do you notice from meditating? He says, TM calms the mind and it calms the mom. So the practices that de-stress are useful. And so one of the other themes from our first book that we pick up in the second book is this self-motivation. And we just briefly talk about self-determination theory that we mentioned in the self-driven child, which holds that to be intrinsically motivated, we have to have 3 needs fulfilled: for a sense of competence, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of autonomy. And we've been saying the last several years that what in most of the places around the country that we visit, what gets emphasized more than anything else is the competence part. And we were really struck. There's a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation published this report in 2017, looking at the causes of stress and anxiety in adolescence. And the first 4 were poverty, trauma, discrimination, and excessive pressure to excel. Was that in the same ballpark as poverty, trauma, and discrimination? And so we think we want kids to have healthy self-motivation. And so we got to revisit how the developing, promoting autonomy, that sense of competence and relatedness. And we emphasize how counterproductive it is to try to motivate kids through fear or guilt. I mean, we may be able to get them to do stuff, but it doesn't do anything for self-motivation. And there's a story in the book about another kid in a different Catholic school, 8th grade, applying out. And this kid had a language disorder and ADHD and learning disabilities, and school was really hard for him. But he's basically kind of given up. And I went to a meeting at the school, and the principal said, I've already had 2 talks with him again. I'm going to talk to him this afternoon. He's got to turn this around. He's applying to high school. It's a 4-year decision. And I said, well, respectfully, this is a great principle too. I said, respectfully, that if you already told him that it's important that you kind of work hard and try to turn this around, and he hasn't done it, just tell him again and again. It's just piling on, because basically it's not lost on him. He wants to go to a decent high school, but he's probably had the experience of trying to do better and not being able to do better, even if he tries. So he's discouraged. Why don't we tell him that it's really not that big a deal where you go to high school. And if you don't get in where you want to go, you can work hard as a ninth grader and then you can transfer. Let's let him see how you can get from where he is now, this pretty discouraged place, to something better, because that's what motivates kids. It's not fear. It's not trying to guilt them into doing things. And so we talk about talking with kids in a way that minimizes that fear, that pressure that leads to so much stress, and helping them find that what they're passionate about. I mean, we talk about working hard, the value of working hard, that what Carol Dweck talks about, a growth mindset. But we also talk about the value of playing hard. And I used to tell my son who had ADHD and learning disabilities, I said, who loved baseball. I tell him, baseball, in my opinion, baseball is important to me. I mean, I think baseball is important for your life as school is. And in part, because I know that so much of brain development is helped by working really hard to get something better and better at something you care about. And I also know that it's that passionate pursuit of pastimes that is the key to developing self-motivation. And Ned, do you want to talk about a little bit about this idea that when so many parents say, how do I get my kid motivated? What they're really saying is, how do I get them to change? And there's a chapter in our book about change. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, Bill. In part because it's when we see our kids in a hard space, we get so anxious. And a kid who's seeming like a C student right now, we worry that they're going to have a C life, and we have this tendency to want to fix it. And there's a wonderful branch of psychology called motivational interview, and it's two great psychologists who working with problem drinkers. And traditionally, what was done is it sort of pile on of all the reasons of all the bad outcomes of continuing to drink in unabashed ways of you'd lose your health, your wife, your job, blah 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 blah. But what it didn't cause change. It just brought more resistance and more conflict, and people would deny the problems, and they'd fight and they fight and they fight. And the two great insights of motivational interviewing are these. Excuse me. One, that when people bring a problem to us, we have a natural inclination to want to fix it. We have a righting reflex. We want to make it right because we don't want people who we know to struggle. We don't want someone to drink themselves into an early death. We don't want our kids to suffer when school feels like it's such the pits. The challenge is, the other great insight of motivational interviewing is that people are ambivalent about changing. And so if we go back to the story I was telling before, kid comes home at a terrible grade, whatever, if kids are getting terrible grades, it's not lost on them that if they got better grades, there are advantages to that. They might feel better. Their teachers might approve more. They might have better choices, blah, 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 or someone who's, unhealthy weight or problem with drinking or whatever, that there are advantages to changing that behavior. But they're ambivalent because they also know it might take a lot for me to go from a C student to an A student, right? I might have to give up I might have to give up baseball. I might have to give up time with my friends. I might have to give up Xbox. And that may sound silly, but it may be a real thing. But they also know I could work really, 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 really hard and work as hard as I could, and I still might come up short. And then how would I feel? And so what happens is when we have this righting reflex and people bring us a problem, we start piling on all the reasons why, and here's what you got to do. The person will reflexively start arguing all the reasons why that won't work. And you've probably had this experience talking to your own kids, why it won't work, why it's so hard, why it's a terrible idea, why it's not worth it. And what we want to do instead is motivational interviewing is a specific discipline and takes some training, but the insights from it, any of us can use, even if we're not trained psychologists. And it's simply that we ask open-ended questions. We use that reflective listening, the wigging that we talked about before, and we listen for what's known as change talk. So here's the story that we talk about in our book. We have a good friend who's a psychologist, a counselor at a school, and she was talking with this girl who was a really heavy pot user. And she was talking with the girl, and she said, look, I'm not going to be the umpteenth adult to tell you all the reasons why smoking pot's not such a good idea. You're a pretty smart kid, and I'm sure you already understand that. But I am curious. I'd love to understand your relationship with pot. And the girl sort of, unwound a little bit. She said, well, I feel more relaxed when I'm high. And the kids I smoke with are actually pretty funny. I really like them. They're kind of cool. And actually, I feel more funny and cool when I'm with them and I'm high. And she kept going on for a while. And our friend just validated. And eventually the girl said, but it is kind of expensive. Now that's where it's easy for us as parents. See, that's, you got to stop. But she didn't do that. And she said, oh, well, tell me more about that. She says, well, I buy twice a week and it's kind of expensive. And she says, well, if you had more money, what would you do? Well, my friend got these really cool shoes. I really like them. And I think I'd probably get a pair of those. And I haven't got my hair done in a while. And I think it'd be kind of cool to get my hair done and say, well, that makes sense. Very light, very light. And a few weeks later, our friend, the therapist, runs into this girl and she's got her hair done. And she looks and said, huh, that looks cute. Well, tell me about that. Well, last week I decided maybe I'd just buy once this week. And the idea behind it is this, that if we can create the space for anyone in our lives, including our kids, to articulate the reasons for themselves to go this way rather than that way, it's so much more powerful to hear oneself articulate the reasons to do the things that are in one's own best interest than to have someone else tell me the reason why I should do these things, in which case I so often fight those very things. So with this really wonderful chapter, it's a very delicate approach, but we really, really like this because as parents, as people who love our kids, when things aren't going well, of course we want to help them change. And these are the tools to help them do that.
Yeah. And I'll just mention briefly that in this chapter, it's called the language and silence of change, the silence being the listening part. And we also talk about this, there's a new program for treating childhood anxiety that just works with parents. It's called, the acronym is SPACE. It's called supporting
Parenting
of
anxious childhood emotions. Yeah.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah.
Happy to help.
Yeah. But,
what do you say, Bill? Sorry.
But the idea is basically that you can't change a kid. In all the science of change says you really can't change somebody unless they're asking you to help them change. And so often we feel that kids feel that we're trying to get them to change and they resist. And the beautiful thing about the SPACE program, which I won't go into in detail, is in the chapter, is that it's as effective. Just works with parents on changing their steps and getting them to make supportive statements like, I know this makes you really anxious, but I'm 100% confident you can handle it. And changing the ways that we accommodate to their anxiety, like reassuring them 100 times a day. And then we stop doing that. And we express confidence in their ability to handle things. And this approach, which doesn't work with the kids at all, it's as effective at reducing kids' anxiety is actual cognitive behavioral therapy for the kids. So we just love this idea that we have so much power by just focusing on what's the right thing for us to do, and as a way of influencing our kids without trying to change them directly. And do you want to talk a little bit about the sleep and technology piece?
Yeah. We have a chapter in What Do You Say with the title Technology, the hard ones, technology and sleep. Because, honest to gosh, every place we ever go, if the first question isn't about technology, it's got to be about sleep. And if it's not one of those two, we're always surprised. And the point that we make in The Self-Driven Child and the language that we talk about here is for us as parents to think of ourselves and to approach working with our kids as consultants. Not the boss, not the manager, not the homework Gestapo, not trying to close down all the technology all the time, but rather to work with our kids to help them develop their healthy sleep schedules, to help them learn to manage their own technology rather than managing it for them. And I'll throw my son, who's in the next room somewhere, who's 19 years old. He's starting his second year of college. ADHD is transfixed by video games as anything as you can imagine. And for people who've read The Self-Driven Child, the stories about him when he was in 5th grade, and we took this consultant approach because we knew that it was only a number of years before this lovely child was going to go off to some far-flung corner of the country for college without any parental oversight, mind you, with a suitcase full of our money, right? And we needed him to struggle with these things himself, because if we were the ones who made things go well, that's a terrible plan for the future when they leave our household. So the story that's in the book that I really enjoy, when my son was in a sophomore year in high school, the game Fortnite came through our house like a biblical plague. It was bonkers. And he played and he played and he played, and he had a whale of a good time. But still, we were kind of concerned. So I kept looking for an opportunity. So there was a Thursday night. He had Friday off of school. So I said, hey, pal, what are you doing with your day off tomorrow? He sort of smiles and says, play Fortnite. I said, nice. Anything else? I'll think about it. I was hoping he'd say clean his room, but that wasn't on the list. I'm like, okay, great. All right. So I say nothing. I go to work. I come home on Friday afternoon. It's like 6 o'clock. There's my kid in front of the computer, still in his pajamas. I admit to being a little hot, like, seriously, dude? But I don't say that. And I say, are you close to it? Could you finish up and like win, die? I don't really care. So, because I would like to go out for pizza. Oh, yeah. And he's a pretty easygoing guy. Oh, and can you get dressed? Oh, yeah, right. My bad. I calm down. I say nothing. We go and have a lovely pizza dinner. I say nothing. Saturday, I say nothing. Sunday morning, I say nothing. 5 o'clock on Sunday, which if you have a teenage boy, particularly when he's ADHD, is sort of the witching hour when he realizes, oh, dang, tomorrow is Monday. I have all that work to do. Now he's upset with himself. Oh my God, I can't believe I wasted the whole day I'm playing Fortnite. Why did I do any homework on Friday? If ever there were opportunity for parental I told you so-ism, this was it. But so I'd written this book. So that seemed like the thing I was not supposed to say. So I looked at him and I said, well, gosh, I understand that frustration because goodness knows I did things like that when I was his age. And I said, I'm so sorry, but can I ask you a question? Sure, we're getting the buy-in, right? I said, do you recall roughly, how many hours you spent playing on Friday? I don't know, 8 or 10. Was it fun? Oh yeah, it was awesome. We won 4 times. We totally rocked these guys. A little validation, right? I said, well, one more question. How many hours would you, if you needed to, how many hours would have been sufficient to get your Fortnite fix? He's like, 4 or 5 maybe? Nice, okay. Last question. In the future, would it be helpful for your mom if she's home or for me if I'm around to help you manage your use of technology so you can play and hang with your friends and win and all that jazz, but you don't feel like you've wasted your whole day? Yeah, I think that'd be good. Now we had buy-in and we really spent the next couple of years offering help. Would it be helpful if, I know you got this thing to do. Would it be helpful for me to hold your phone because I know things are blowing up on Instagram, whatever? Would it be helpful? No, I've got it. Or yeah, I would. And now we were on his side. We were working with him to learn to manage his use of technology, not working on him to get him to manage his use of technology. And I know that you guys are in a corner of the world where people probably think even more about technology than we do here on the East Coast. And I know how hard it is. We talk about this in great depth. But even for the hard ones of things like technology, we feel incredibly strongly, partly because the science is on our side, that we want to take this consultative, a collaborative approach with our kids while we still have them under our household, while we still have this influence over them so that they're prepared to handle these things for themselves as adults.
Hey, Ned, there's 2 more topics. Let's do speed rounds.
You got it.
2 minutes maximum, these last 2 topics.
All right, you got it.
Okay. So one is there's a chapter called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness. And the idea is it's kind of based in part was I was in Houston, I think the same trip I mentioned earlier. And I was at a different school and I was meeting with these student government leaders, these high school student government leaders. And I said, how many of you want to be happy as adults? And they all kind of sheepishly raised their hand. And I said, well, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And this one kid kind of said, well, that we understand, I understand that if you get into a good enough college, everything else is set. And the other kid said, yeah, that's kind of what we understand. And I'm thinking, oh God, how could they, you couldn't be farther wrong. If that were true, kids at Yale would be the happiest people on the planet. And yet we were so struck by Laurie Santos' work, the psychologist at Yale who started teaching the course on happiness at Yale that became the most subscribed course in the history of Yale University by far, because she lived with Yale undergraduates in a residential dormitory, and we just saw how unhappy they were and started teaching them, here's what we know about the science of happiness. And Ned and I are thinking, why do kids have to wait till they go to college to find out what makes them happy? So we have a chapter on talking with kids about what does science say makes us happiness? And achievement is part of it. But and certainly the way you're wired in terms of, do you see the glass half empty, that there's a genetic component to that. But there's a huge contribution of doing things that are meaningful, of deep engagement in what you're doing, in relationships, things that we have a lot of choice about. So that we talk about, how do we talk with kids about what makes us happy, what makes people in general happy, focusing on the difference between happiness and pleasure. That in so many high achieving kids, they focus on pleasure, and I think which is confusing with happiness. So in any case, that's my 2 minutes on happiness.
And the last chapter we talk about is consequences. We would often get parents say, but what about consequences? And we, like you, want kids to learn from their experience, right? But if we can start with reminding ourselves that the etymological root of the word discipline is not to punish, but to teach. So we love natural consequences, things that are basic. I do this and that happens. And natural consequences don't require parents at all. It's just the universe responding in a cause and effect kind of way to what kids do. You don't study, you're probably not going to do on the test. That's just kind of how it happens. We want to be everything else we want to do in a collaborative way, because punishment so often feels like logical consequences feel like punishment, that I'm making a kid suffer rather than I'm making a kid learn. And particularly for kids who are resistant, who are more anxious, who are more stubborn, the kids who often get the most punishment learn the least from it. A lot of literature on that. And again, with this, even with consequences, we can do this in a way where we're teaching, and do it in a way that's respectful, that shows care, that is deepening our relationship. And there's a story I'll try to tell really quickly in the book about a kid who the parents had a kid, and she was kind of crazy and doing all sorts of things, and she was having parties and then lying about it all the time. Parents go out for dinner, they get a call from the neighbor, said, Sally's got a rager going over there. And the parents come home and everything's cleaned up, and like there's not a note of evidence. And they said, well, Mrs. Jones said you had a party next door. Nope, there's no party here. She's like, are you saying that she lied? She must be. No party here. And the dad was super upset, and he calls up his friend as a counselor. So what should I do? I'm so upset, and I was upset that she was lying. I was upset she was behaving badly, but I was also so upset that our relationship was so bad. And the friend said, offer her amnesty. Offer her amnesty. And so dad goes in and says, look, I think if I lied to my parents, I'd feel pretty bad about it. But I want to let you know, whatever happened tonight didn't happen. I'm offering you amnesty. And I don't really care, but I want to throw that out there. And goes to bed, and she sort of rouses him a little bit later in the night and comes into the bedroom and says, you know what? I lied. I did have a party, and I'm really sorry. And he said the temperature in our relationship went up about 30 degrees from frozen. I barely had a conversation with her in 2 years of all this fighting. And she started to admit that she had friends who weren't a great influence, and for us, where Bill started, we're so worried about the world that kids are growing up in today, that I don't know who we can even blame, is so much more intense, is so much more fast-paced, feels so much more scarce, so much more stressful, the one that most of us grew up in. And it's so bad for developing brains. And we have zero interest in blaming any parent who's here, but rather saying that, knowing that all of this stuff is going on out there, that a close connection between you and your kid is the most proven thing that you can have to help protect your kid, to Teflon coat your kid against stress. Because we know that the model for developing stress tolerance, resilience, is adversity plus support. And that's how we get resilience. And so we will end this talk with where we started, that if you do nothing else to put the primacy of your relationship with your kid and that close connection, because one, it's as good as you can get for predicting good outcomes for your kids. And ultimately, we assume that you, like us, had kids because you love them. So we would like to thank Charlene and Bev and all the parenting education folks for having us here, and all of you for joining us. We had a great response to our first book, and we're really trying to get this book out to folks, because it's hard. Parenting is not easy, and as Bill pointed out, we put this book together to give people different words, different phrases. They're scripts of the kind of things that you might typically say, and then kind of another way to go about it. As I've shared for folks, I have one kid at age, the intense as you get, and it's not easy. And I'm really humbled by this experience of parenting. But we want things to go well, not just for your kids, but for everyone's kids, because the world could be going in a better place. And if we think if we can help provide folks with tools to make everything go better for your family and your kids, we'd like to do that. So we're really grateful to be with you all tonight.
Thank you so much, Bill and Ned. The comments are just pouring in. People saying we're so grateful. Thank you so much. I'm going to get the book. Again, my partner, Bev Hartman, and I, between the two of us, have 60 years of experience as educators. I have not read, and I mean this literally, better parenting books in my life than The Self-Driven Child and its new companion. What do you say? So everybody online, go get that book. Everything they talked about tonight is in it, along with reams of more great advice. So we're going to do sort of a speed dating thing here with questions, because so many good questions have come in and we could spend hours talking. We have people saying, I wish I could just have those guys in my ear all day. We all wish that. But anyway, here we go. Let's try it. Okay. This is a good question. Should I tell my child that I'm trying a new approach regarding communication so they're in on the transition?
Yeah, I think that especially if you've been communicating in a way that's just been stressful, you've been arguing, you've been on your kid, or you've been fighting about stuff, just say, I realize I've been beating my head against the wall, and I'm sorry I've been on you. I wanted to try something different here. I think it's perfectly fine to be transparent, and I'm 71 years old, and I don't remember the specific instances, but when I was in my 40s, I could still remember times when my father came in and apologized to me. He'd get mad at me about something, and he'd come in and say, "I had a really hard day at work. I'm sorry. I took it out on you." And I just remember feeling so deeply respected. So we feel like if there's a better way of doing something, sure, to tell your kid, "I'm sorry," apologize, and try to do it a different way.
I agree 100%. And it's also great modeling that we don't have to be perfect, and we make mistakes we don't hide. I mean, if you want to talk about a growth mindset, as well as a really valuable tool, for kids to carry in life. I mean, there are so many people, even politicians, who are just terrible at apologizing, as opposed to saying, I really did that badly. I'm sorry that I did that. And, I'm working hard to do it differently going forward.
Parents, I really want you to hear that. It does not lessen your power or control as a parent to respect your kids and admit a mistake. In fact, they'll respect you more. Such a great piece of advice. Okay. How can you make your teenager talk to you even when you try to keep it light and friendly and give them space? My teenager is ultra rigid, won't allow me to enter her space.
Well, the short answer is you can't make them do anything, right?
Yeah.
But I think what you're really asking for, what are tools that I sort of coax folks out? And I'll say that, so my daughter, who's going in her last year of high school, is brilliant and rigid. And when she sets her mind to something, that's it. I've never talked her out of anything. And I have a lot of words to say. And what I finally started to do is really using this validation when I can see that she's really mad about something. This is what I've been doing the last couple of years. I say, "Boy, you look like you're pretty upset about something. And if there's a way that I can help, I'd be happy to help. But I also don't want to pry. So I don't want to act like I'm not noticing, because I see there's something going on, and that's yours. And if I can help, please share it with me. And if you don't, that's yours too." And it's the lightest way that I can come up to validate, say, "Look, I see it. I notice it. I don't know what it is. It's not mine to solve. It's mine to help you if you want my help." And she'll oftentimes, because when I would ask her what's going on, she'll go, I said, "Is there anything I can help with?" And I get that. And that's when I would say those exact same words and say, "Well, can I check? I'll check back in a half an hour. Is that okay?" And that for me has been the most effective way, because when kids feel it, when you see that there's something that they could really help them to get off their chest, but you try to force them, they just get defensive, and they dig even more. And then you're kind of on the other side of the wall from them. So that'd be my feeling. Just be really light and just say, "I can see you're having a hard day and I wish it were better. And if there's a way I can help, let me know. And maybe I'll check back in an hour." So that you may add to that, but that's my approach.
Yeah, no, I love what you said, Ned, and I'll add three things. One is that, especially for teenagers, it's good for them to have other people to talk to. I mean, my kids, my son would talk to me about a lot of stuff, but there's certain things he'd prefer to talk to one of his coaches about, or a teacher about, and that's great, or an uncle about. And it's great for kids to have a network of people to talk. They don't have to talk with us about everything. The other thing is, as you know, Bev and Charlene and I are all former nursery school teachers. And as nursery school teacher, I learned that you got a new kid, to get them to talk. You don't start asking questions. You just start talking to them. You say, you know, I got this dog at home. And I think so. And the implication is that if kids don't talk, to talk to them a little bit. You know, I got this idea. I run it by you. I have this problem at work. Can I just run it by you? Just talk yourself, share yourself, kind of prime the pump a little bit that way. The other thing is that there's some kids, my experience is that most kids are more likely to open up when they're tired and at night. And with both my kids, well, I loved driving home from baseball games or softball games with them at night, because they'd be in the back seat and they'd just be so much more likely to talk. With younger kids, just go sitting on their bed when they're tired, their defenses are down a little bit, and just tell them a little bit about your day. And that I think that also can prime the pump.
And the last thing I would say, we have to talk about this in the book, is sometimes you can just even text them because it feels less intense, and say,
that's a good point.
Hey, it sure looks like you're pretty upset. Is there anything I can do to help? And they'll say no, because again, I often do use that. Is it okay if I check in an hour? Because they're not going to be upset about something in it that's further down the line. Because ultimately, you're trying to, as a parent, you may feel like it's your job to solve the hard feelings that they have. But ultimately, it's way more important for kids to learn to solve their own hard problems. And so with my daughter, all I'm doing is saying, I see you, I hear you, I'm validating it. And then in a perfect world, as she does 19 times out of 20, she talks herself out of the feelings. And that's way better. It's hard for me, but it's much more important for her development, for her to put things in perspective, than for me to put things in perspective for her.
Great points. Listen to this, parents, really good advice. Here's a question. I'll start by answering it myself. Do these strategies work with college-age kids that aren't living at home? Yes. I use them on my adult kids, one of whom is now expecting his first child. Finally, he said to me, I get it, Mom. You can't do that anymore. But it does work with college-age kids. So please do use these concepts, okay? All right, here's a question for you guys. Are there times when a hard no is appropriate? What if smoking weed or playing video games 20 hours straight is something I absolutely don't want my kid to do? So
I think that this idea of playing a consultant role. So if the energy kids get about video games, for example, is just no, stop. It becomes hard to influence them, because all they do is fight back. And what we suggest in the book regarding video games, for example, is show interest in them. Play along, see if you can learn the game and play yourself, or at least watch them play, and say stuff like, God, I see why you love this stuff. I can see it. I see how happy you are when you get to the next level. I see how much fun it is when you connect with your friends. And you use that empathy and as opposed to judgment. We don't want to start with judgment. We want to start with trying to understand. And that way, then we say, you know, it's kind of, we talk in both of our books about collaborative problem solving. So when you're in a good mood and the kid's in a good mood, say, can we talk about video games for a few minutes? Because I know, let me start, because I know, and I've been watching you, I tried playing myself, they're incredible. I get that. And also, I know that if you play too much, you get kind of irritable, you neglect your schoolwork, and I know you don't like that either. Let's see if we can figure out some kind of schedule that will work for you and work for me. And so we think that if you, with some kids, you say no, I forbid that, they find a way to beat you. And it's just more effective to really try to influence them and we think saying, you know, I couldn't live with myself as a parent if I was knowingly letting you play the video games 20 hours a day. I couldn't, I feel like the worst parent in the world, and that's not going to work for me. So we got to find some way. And we certainly in the chapter on limits, we set limits, but ideally we set limits with the kids. We kind of work it out, something that works for them, works for us. And we be assertive. We should be assertive when we make agreements with our kids. But laying on the rules, saying my way or the highway, it's just never proven to be very effective. And going back to your point,
Yeah.
Ned, about discipline being teaching.
Yeah, and I think if you get a chance to read the book, if you read the chapter about sleep and technology and read the one about consequence, I think between the two of them, you'll figure out kind of the path through there. I mean, we look at a lot of the work of Jane Nelson in Positive Discipline, which is it's an incredibly important book, and really kind of take her wisdom and edicts and just put them in a more modern context, because when she wrote that book, the internet didn't exist, and it's a lot more complicated now. But I think, Bill, everything you said is right. I mean, it's hard because these technologies are by design, they're about as addictive as they can be. And so we're trying to help our kids learn to manage that in ways that are balanced and appropriate. But I would be concerned if my kid were playing 20 hours a day, and you're trying to help him do that in ways that are more balanced.
I want to add just about the pot, because the story that Ned told, it's easier for a school counselor to say, tell me about what pot does for you in a non-judgmental way than it is for parents, because we tend to be reactive, and we want to get, because no, you can't do that. But actually, if we can start out, if we can kind of discipline ourselves to start out by seeking first to understand, it's much easier. I mean, there are some kids where their drug use is out of control, and we have to put them into a program where they want to or not. But short of that, if we're respectful, we try to understand what it does. We talk to them what we know about the effect of pot on the developing brain. Many kids will come around on their own. And in fact, I was just talking to a mother recently who I sent her kind of a galley copy of our book, and her kids smoking a lot of pot, and she just really took to try to understand kind of the pros and cons. How does this help you? Are there any negative things to it? And just talking through the negative stuff, he said, yeah, I think I really ought to cut down. And he stopped altogether. And this doesn't happen every time. And I'm not saying that there are kids who develop serious drug problems and we need to treat that, whether they want treatment or not. But I am saying that if we can start with seeking to understand, it's very powerful.
All right, last quick 2 questions, really speed round here. First one, I know both of you gentlemen work with kids with anxiety. This is an important question. How are these techniques impacted for kids with anxiety disorders?
Well, 3 thoughts. One is that this whole idea, anxiety, if you're anxious, a kid is anxious, it has a very little sense of control. So all the things we recommend in both books that try to increase a kid's sense of control will affect their ability to regulate anxiety. Also, this SPACE program, the Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions program that we mentioned, it just shows you that this idea of not trying to change the kid. I mean, certainly, I recommend therapy for kids who have anxiety, but this idea that we have so much power by changing the way we react and we try to soothe anxious kids, tremendous implications for helping kids feel more safe in the world and have the experience of being able to master their own anxiety.
Well, and Ned, you talk about in your work as a test prep expert, you're not teaching them algebra equations. You're really lowering their anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of both, in part because having tools and competency is gonna help there, but absolutely, Bev. I mean, I think if there's any secret sauce that I'd like to think that I bring to this, it's giving kids or helping kids develop tools so they can manage their own anxiety. And there's a reason why we very purposely chose the term stress tolerance. That we really, all of us need to develop the ability to tolerate stress, because we don't want kids having chronic or toxic stress, but real life is full of stress. We experience stress when, before a soccer game or asking someone out on a date or whatever. And the challenge is that the dominant manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And so what we as parents so often do when we see a kid who's stressed, we either jump in to try to shield them from it or save them from it so they don't have to face the stress themselves, in part because it's so stressful to us, but we deprive them the very thing, the very experience that they need to develop their own tolerance to stress. I mean, the paradigm model for treating anxiety is cognitive behavioral therapy, thinking about things differently with exposure therapy. So you face the very thing that you face. And so absolutely, this book was designed as much towards kids with anxiety as any population we could possibly think of, because Bill and I feel very strongly, even me as a test prep guy, that we want to do everything we can to help prevent children and teenagers from developing stress-related disorders, because it just has such a cascading effect through everything in the rest of their lives that matters. And it's hard for us as parents to sit back and give less support rather than more support. But there's a story in the book that you'll love, that talks about oh, good grief, Bill, who's the Ray Charles, when he first became blind. And we won't tell the whole story, but basically when he first became blind, and the supreme courage that his mom had in helping him just enough and not too much, because he needed to learn to navigate the world on his own. It's a beautiful movie and a beautifully told story. And so, I mean, I've got a kid who's anxious. And I have walked this walk, and it has been a long path for her to develop the stress tolerance that she has. But at this point, when she's a senior in high school, I have zero concern about her going off to college. And she's a profoundly different person than she was when she was in 8th grade. And the only reason she's been there is that we, with help of people, really good therapists, have not deprived her of the very situations, the very challenge that she has needed to become the capable young woman that she is.
Well said, Ned. Thank you. So listen, I want to respect the time of everybody who's on with us, as well as Bill and Ned's time. Last question. We always end this way. We're living in very stressful times. We're here in Northern California. The wildfires are burning toward our beloved Lake Tahoe. These are very tough times we're living in. What gives you both hope for the future?
Well, for me, people want their lives to work out. Even kids where things are going terribly, they still want their lives to work out, and if you go hiking, right, you see life, liking clinging to the top of, high peaks. Life wants to thrive. Children want to thrive. And I think I've shared, with your audience before, Charlene, I had a family upbringing that was way more stuff going on than I wish it would have been. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But I am also confident that it's maybe the person that I am. And I like the person that I am. I like the life that I have. And I wouldn't want to relive those things if I could possibly avoid them. But I also wouldn't want someone to take them away from me. And so, we talk in the first book about the parable of the Chinese farmer, right? And it's so hard to know, is this a disaster? Do we stop now and measure whether it's a good thing or bad thing, or do we wait 6 months, or do we wait a year? Maybe the stuff that the terrible fires that are out west are what will finally be necessary to get a political groundswell in this whole darn country to say, you know what, the path that we're on is not the right one. And I know there's untold suffering from what's going on there. But do we make that judgment now, or do we make it 10 years from now, or is it 100 years from now? So I remain hopeful, because I'm convinced that people as individuals, and really we as a society, we want things to work out well in the end.
Thank you, Ned. So true. Beautifully said. Bill, last word to you.
So I'm struck by the fact that, at least going back to the biblical prophets, people are saying the world is coming to an end. The things are so horrible, it couldn't possibly get any worse. And I think that it's certainly, people have thought like that for millennia. And I think that I'm struck also by the fact that when the Berlin Wall fell, nobody saw it coming. And so we tend to think that things are going in a negative direction. We see that this is going well. That one of the main errors we make in our thinking, that we talk about this in the book, is the fortune telling error of thinking, I know how this is going to turn out. Well, we don't know. And for all we know, that nature is healing itself. For all we know, as Ned said, that young people, so many young people are so committed that notions of diversity and inclusion and taking care of the planet are so intuitive to them in the way that they aren't, the baby boomers and people of Ned's generation, Charlene, your generation, that I see that it's very possible that things get really, really good. And especially as the world realizes that we have to work together if we're going to save the planet. I mean, all kinds of things can happen that we've just never anticipated.
Well, thank you so much, Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud, for a brilliant conversation today. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. It will be available again on our video library in a few days. We will make sure that you all get that link, but thank you, and do go get the books. Their new book, What Do You Say? And The Self-Driven Child by Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Highly recommend them. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Take care. Presenters, if you would stay with us for a minute, and everybody else, we're going to ask you to log out. Thanks again. Have a good night. Stay safe and stay well.